What's up, political peeps? Per usual, I'm your host, Arav Kapoor. Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, the new chairman of Fairfield, Connecticut's Board of Finance, a Democrat. He served on the Board of Finance for quite some time. Craig Curley, welcome to the GeoPolitical.
Thank you, Arav. Look forward to our conversation today and appreciate you giving me a chance to chat today.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Tons of stuff to break down. Of course, people are really passionate about taxes and how much things cost for them. And the Board of Finance has such a key role in everything in Fairfield, and we're going to talk more about that later today. Tons to unpack. To start, you ran originally for the Board of Finance back in 2021. Before that, you were involved in other community projects, community committees. What encouraged you to dive into public service?
Great question. I've always felt like I wanted to give back to the community. I think it was just part of my upbringing. As I'm the youngest of four, and my parents always instilled that type of giving back type of mindset. And as you would expect, my foray into I was a big brother when I was younger, before I was married. And then once I was married and had kids, I got involved in kids activities. I was a coach of the Little League and involved with the Little League for almost 10 years, Fairfield National Little League, go FNLL. Um, and my role always seemed to expand. So at first I was a coach, then I became a division coordinator, then I became a field coordinator, and took on responsibility for improving the fields. I think the league had 7 fields that they used, and we did 3 major renovations, raised money for that, and got the fields in better condition for the kids to play. And then after that, I got involved with the town more broadly. I was on the golf commission from 2009 to 2014, chairman for 4 of those 5 years, and put together a 10-year plan, master improvement plan for the golf operations for the town, and really tried to give back. I've always tried to follow a scouting. I wasn't a scout, but my kids were involved with scouts for 4 years, and one of the scout mantras was always leave something in better condition than when you got there. And so I've always tried to improve things along the way. And prior to the Board of Finance, my most recent role in the community was I was the chair of the building committee that replaced the clubhouse up at the golf course. That was about a $7 million project that took about 3 years during COVID. And I was very happy that project got completed successfully on time and under budget, which was no small task with all the challenges that COVID brought. And then with that, I moved on to a bigger role on the Board of Finance 4 years ago, and I'm 4 years into a 6-year term, and my final 2 hopefully will be as chair, and looking forward to it.
What specifically brought you to the Board of Finance? I know you have some other finance experience in the private sector.
Yeah, exactly. So my day job has always been in the financial world. I got my finance degree from the School of Business at University of Connecticut, graduated in 1991, and I've always had a role in finance in my career. I started with IBM Credit um, in more of an accounting role, then moved into financial planning and analysis. Moved from IBM to Nations Credit, which was a subsidiary of Nations Bank, and became the director of financial planning and analysis. So dealt with a lot of budgets and forecasts, and it was a diversified finance company. So I think there were 11 different divisions that we had to roll up and coordinate. And then I just built on it from there. I've been Nations Credit was part of Nations Bank, which was ultimately part of a merger with Bank of America, and I've been with Bank of America, still with Bank of America. I left for a short stint from '03 to '08, but returned back to Bank of America the last 16 years or so. I've been working in renewable energy, which has been fascinating. Project finance, dealing with a lot of individual companies effectively, and how each of these projects would operate autonomously. So it's all I've always had a financial or perspective on my work, and I parlayed that into what I could do and give back to the town.
That's really important experience for a board as important as the Fairfield Board of Finance, and it ties into so many of the responsibilities of the board. One of the primary responsibilities that you guys do, you have to work on this every year, is the town budget. It's obviously something that a lot of people talk about because it increases and decreases taxes. I think I'm going to break down the budget process for the audience. Cut me off at any time to add anything in, and I have a couple questions for you about it.
Sure,
So,
sure.
in the context of the 2025-2026 budget, which you passed in spring,
Yep,
in January, all the departments propose their budgets and how much funding they need to the Board of
yep,
Selectmen and the first selectman himself. Then the
yep,
first selectman will present his budget, his vision for the town to the Board of Selectmen. Based on my understanding, they reconcile the visions of the individual departments and the first selectman, and then the budget comes to you guys, the Board of Finance, in April. Ultimately, last year's budget, there was a tax increase because the budget increased. Should we always expect a tax increase and a higher budget with the cost of everything going up?
yeah. Great question. Yeah, I'm going to clarify just a couple of things in terms of the process timeline there. So really through November, December, the Board of Education and the superintendent of the school district is putting together the education side of the budget. Similarly, the town side employees, department heads are preparing and submitting their budget requests to the first select woman, and that process is ongoing right now. And that will basically that work will really get done by the first select woman, Christine Talley, in her staff in January. It'll then go to the Board of Selectmen in February. They'll have detailed conversations, and then that gets approved in late February, and then moves over. Really, the busy period for the Board of Finance is the month of March. We'll have two or three meetings per week, every week for 4 or 5 weeks, and they're long. But we do all our deliberation and work during the month of March. We hand it over to the RTM. They do their work in April, and then at the end of April, it comes back to the Board of Finance, where we will actually set the mill rate the first week in May. So that's the timeline. To answer your question about will taxes always go up, there was an increase this past year. I think it was a 1 point. I pulled up my files from earlier just so I'd be prepared for this discussion, but it was a 1.76% increase in the mill rate last year. Will taxes always go up? Hopefully, no. The short answer is hopefully no. We as a board take it very seriously to make sure that every dollar, every tax dollar that's spent is spent wisely. I I think we have a very good relationship with our first select woman, who is very good at her job as well, and her department heads are making sure that they have a sharpened pencil when they make budget requests. It's not just we got this much last year, so we want the same amount or a little more this year. It's really justifying what the request and the ask is. But the reality is the town of Fairfield is also subject to inflation as well. The biggest part of the town's operating expense comes from personnel, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the police, whether it's the fire department, or all the department heads and town employees. Um, Personnel expense is the biggest number one expense for the town, and individuals, whether it's contractual because of union contracts or just in general, expect to get at least a cost of living increase to keep up with inflation. So the town is subject to inflation as well. So it's really incumbent upon us to try and manage that potential increase to be at or below the rate of inflation. That's certainly been a goal of mine. I know it's important for other board members as well, to try and make sure that those increases are in line with or below inflation.
But if you are, I guess, you have to compromise, right? When you take funding away from something because you have to balance the cost of living increases in wages for the town employees and that kind of thing. How do you be sure that, since a lot of people move to Fairfield for things like education and the great
Yeah.
community services that we have, how do you find the balance between finding efficiencies in those areas but also being able to pay town employees increased wages and not have a insane tax increase.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. And that is really important for us to try and manage, Arav. And I would say that's our biggest challenge. Part of managing that is to have good relationships with the people who are making those preliminary decisions. I think Superintendent Testani, who runs our school district, has done a very good job. Now, obviously, anytime a an individual steps into a new role and he's only been here a few years, he wants to make some changes. And I think it's incumbent upon us to hear out his story and his vision and see that he has a chance to implement that vision. But that doesn't mean that he's got a blank check to play with. I think every time when he submits a budget request that we ask him to justify it and explain. It's not just, yes, some of the salary is contractual. Some of the increases in salaries is contractual, but headcount is not, right? Can a department be run more efficiently? So we for years, well before my time on the board, always asking those in charge to make sure that they run as lean as is reasonable. Now, obviously, the flip side of that coin is if a department, whether it's the education side or the town side, is run too lean, then there's a risk of decrease in services, right? Yeah, and we never want to negatively impact the students' experience in the schools. I think a big part of why I moved to Fairfield with my wife and decided to raise a family here and put them through the public school system is because of the quality of education that Fairfield offers. And I think that continues today. Now, that decision we made 30 years ago, but that decision's made every day by new families coming into Fairfield, and we recognize, we on the board, not just me, but the board recognizes the value of the education system to property values, and to all of the kids who go through the system. So we're really trying to balance maintaining quality, but also making sure that dollars are spent wisely.
Last year's budget proposed by First Selectman Bill Gerber cut Superintendent Testani's original proposal that went through the Board of Education by about $4.8 million. I had Superintendent Testani on my show to discuss this whole process back in May after you guys approved the final budget. And then the Board of Selectmen restored $2 million to that budget. You restored $1 million to the budget. Since
Yeah.
education such an important part of Fairfield, like you were just talking about. That's the reason you guys moved here. That's the reason my family moved here. How did you guys decide to add $1 million back to the Board of Education?
Yeah, and I will say that that was a bipartisan proposal, an amendment to the budget. It was jointly between Shane Penley and Jim Walsh, both Democrat and Republican, respectively. Had a discussion at our final night of the budget before we voted to restore the $1 million. And so I was certainly a proponent of that. And I don't know if that was, I can check because I actually have on my desk here. Yeah, that was an 8-1 vote. There was one no, but 8 yeses. So bipartisan support to restore that additional $1 million. How do we come up with that number? We spend a lot of time with the education budget, speaking with Board of Ed members and the superintendent and his staff to really understand the request and what a potential cut or lack of restoration, right, would mean. And where we wanted to draw the line was to make sure that we didn't adversely affect the experience of the student in the classroom. So could they do things differently with their transportation and busing? Could they do other things that were not necessarily directly related to or not directly affecting the student? And that's where we felt like while it was a $4.8 million cut, 2 million got restored, we could restore another million and ensure that there would be no negative effect on the students. And we felt good about that number. It still didn't give the superintendent 100% restoration, but it was a really good compromise.
That's important, and I wanted to zoom in specifically on where that number comes from. So I think that was a really helpful perspective. You mentioned that amendment was bipartisan to restore the $1 million. If my research was correct, though, the passage of the final budget was along party lines. It was a
Yeah,
5-4 vote. Uh,
yeah.
why weren't we able to reach a bipartisan agreement or compromise?
Yeah, that was an unfortunate thing, and it's been that way for all of the 4 years that I've been on the board. I think if I go back and look at the final vote, each of the last 4 years has gone down party lines. And while I think last year we had 55 different votes that had to take place before the final budget was made. I think the year before was in the 70s, 70 some odd adjustments. And so we're doing this on a line by line basis. And there are many of those adjustments that were 9-0, 8-1, 7-2, not necessarily on party lines. And so it is unfortunate that we would discuss and debate all of these different line items, and when you get to the bottom, it's a math equation, right? So you would hope that at that point it would be bipartisan, but it hasn't been. um, I don't think that's any fault of anyone on the board. I think that there are just general differences of opinion as to political views, I guess. And unfortunately, partisanship has come to Fairfield. Some of the um, partisanship that we see at a national level is pretty negative, and to some extent that's made its way all the way down to the town level. But I will say, and I give full credit to Lori Charlton, who's been an amazing chair over the last 4 years. I am planning on doing a couple of things differently this year during the budget process as the new chair. One of the things I'm doing is we're starting meetings earlier, so we have more time to discuss and make sure that we really vet things. We've added an additional meeting to our budget meeting to our schedule. So that gives us an additional 4 or 5 hours on top of all of these multiple meetings per week. And then the third thing that we're going to do is that we've got immediately before our vote, we've got a meeting with no agenda item other than to deliberate and to discuss across the table where we think things might where we might make a proposal to adjust something up or down. And I want that discussion to be bipartisan. I want to get collaboration and coordination. And my hope is that by the time we get to the actual vote, we won't have any surprises. And I'm hoping that we'll have a 9-0 support for a budget.
Right, that's really important. More time to discuss can, hopefully really work out all the wrinkles that there might be in this partisan disagreement. Uh, Democrats nationally, though, get a bad rep for higher taxes or
Yeah.
uh, you know, be reckless with money. But I think based on our discussion, that's not the case here in Fairfield. Do you think that reputation that Democrats get nationally is part of the reason why the budget vote was along party lines last year? And how are you working to fight against that reputation?
Yeah, yeah, fair question. Look, yes, the short answer is I think there's a stereotype that goes along with party lines in terms of fiscal responsibility. Um, on my 18th birthday, I registered as a Republican, and I was a Republican until well into Donald Trump's first term. I think it was 2017 or 18 when I actually switched parties. So I came from a background finance major in school, financial services professional career, and always look at things from a fiscally conservative perspective. So I think those were my personal roots. But I can tell you, when I was in school in the late 80s and early 90s, there was this concept of trickle down economics where lower taxes would result in money multipliers. More at the top would be spent to fuel the economy. I remember learning about that in school. And guess what? That's a failed concept. It's been proven to not work. And if you actually go back, if we look at the U.S. Economy and how it's done going back to Ronald Reagan, the national economy has done better under Democratic leadership. More job creation, better GDP, reductions in debt, not increases in debt. So I think for me, that's more in line with what I believe a democratic financial views are. And I think that together with my background of, working with financial planning and budgeting and forecasting virtually all of my career, I understand the importance of zero-based budgeting and making sure that all dollars are spent wisely. I recognize that the town is subject to inflation, just as we touched on earlier, but that we try and keep increases at or below inflation so that we're responsible to the taxpayer. I think that thought process is shared on both sides of the aisle. So I think the entire board, whether it's Democrat or Republican, feels like we shouldn't necessarily be spending for the sake of spending.
That's really eye opening, and I never thought about it like that. But really, aside from excessive partisanship, everybody's looking for the same thing. We don't want a lot of tax increases. We want to keep things affordable, and we want really good, solid, but community services that use money efficiently, like education, has to be strong but efficient. Staying on the topic of partisanship, uh,
Sure.
the Board of Finance Democrats now have a majority of 6-3. You guys gained a seat. Is that going to
Yep.
change anything? Would that allow you guys to do more, less?
Well, I mean, it certainly gives some flexibility in terms of individual views, right? And I give, again, I'll say this multiple times, I'm sure, but I give our former chair, Lori Charlton, a tremendous amount of credit because there were some items on that are some theories or items in the budget that we collectively talked about within our caucus, and we felt like we wanted the town to go in this direction, make sure that we're funding education and not making cuts just for the sake of making cuts, for example. But she always allowed us to vote our conscience, and she say, "Hey, look, if we want to discuss or debate, let's discuss or debate." And at the end of the day, if you don't want to support something, that's your prerogative. Or if you do want to push or advocate for something, that's your prerogative. And I want to continue that thought process. And I think we have to be really careful not to take a 6-3 majority for granted. It doesn't give us license to act in a single party manner. Mary LeClaire was a Board of Finance member for 24 years, and her term just ended. And I had a tremendous amount of respect for Mary. And in our last meeting, she talked about, there were many years where the Republican Party enjoyed a 6-3 majority, and they always tried to make sure that the minority party had a voice. And I appreciate that sentiment, and I wholeheartedly agree. So I want to make sure that Jim and Amy and Jim on the Republican side feel like they have a voice and have an impact, because it's not up to one party to run this. I really want this to be a bipartisan board and when to work collaboratively.
Compromise is super important. Before we transition to talk about assessments, last question
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the budget process.
yeah.
Is there anything big that now you're chairman of the Fairfield Board of Finance that you are looking to implement in this year's 26-27 budget?
Yeah.
Anything that you is really important to you that you want to get in the budget?
Well, there are some things. It's not a snapshot, right? It's a movie, and so it's always a bit of a moving target. Um, there are some things that I think that the board can do differently. Some of these things take time, however. And over the last couple of years, the Board of Finance, together with the RTM, looked to make some small tweaks and adjustments to our senior and disabled tax relief program. Um, and last year we did make some changes, but they were relatively small. And so one of the things that I asked our board to consider as we formed our subcommittees is to reestablish the Senior and Disabled Tax Committee subcommittee this year and expect it to be a very active committee, but recognizing that any work that's done will take about a year. And so the changes that might come out of that committee won't be implemented for this upcoming tax cycle. But my hope is recognizing that this does take a long time. Let's try and position ourselves so that next year, a year from now, we're in a position to implement some potentially pretty big changes to that program, because much like we want the education system to be successful, I think it's really important for Fairfield to be affordable for seniors, and we want people who have grown up here and raised families here to be able to afford to stay here. And so I know that Fairfield has had a significant and successful senior and disabled tax relief program for years, one of the best in the state, but that doesn't mean it can't be better. So I really want that committee to be active this year, and I look forward to seeing what we can do a year from now that will really affect some positive change.
And I definitely agree that like changes like that, we can't expect them to be instant. There's kind of things that we have to plan for and budget long term. Now, you've posted about this on Facebook. Talking
Yep,
around right now, everybody's like, "OMG, my home value's up." Pursuant to state statute, the town has to reassess the properties every 5 years. 2020 and then 2025 were Fairfield's years for that. It's a private company, just to clarify the process, that does the assessments, and they present the values, and ultimately, like we talked about before, you guys, based on the budget, which is finalized at the end of April, decide on the
yep,
mill rate, which is how much everybody's going to be taxed based on the value of the homes in
yeah,
the first week of May. One thing you noted was that 64% was the average increase of residential properties in this reevaluation. 17% was the average increase for commercial properties.
yep,
That means that the tax burden is going to shift more onto the residential properties rather than the
yeah.
commercial properties. What does this mean for the mill rate and taxes for residents here in Fairfield?
Yeah, great question, and certainly one that is very current. It seems like I have tried to get in front of this issue and posting on social media and trying to stay in front of this in terms of making sure people understand what this means. Having said that, there continues to be a lot of misinformation out there, and it's our job to try and make sure people understand what's going on. So yes, the short answer is, since it is state statute, every town or city in the state has to do a revaluation every 5 years. And this is our time to do it. Westport went through it this year. Greenwich went through it this year. A number of our surrounding cities and towns went through it this year. The process is the tax assessor will hire a third party to go out and go through the assessment process. We've gotten through that process now, and the assessments have been finalized and sent out. The results of that process was, as you indicated, are of a shift in value from commercial to residential. I think this is our first reval since COVID. And I think everyone recognized that real estate properties, residential real estate properties in the area, Fairfield's no exception, have gone up. We've seen a lot of demand with limited supply. And the average increase in property values across town is about 64%, according to the results received from the assessor and the third party firm. And yes, that does mean that property tax burden will shift from commercial to residential. And it's an unfortunate circumstance for all of our property owners, because we do want uh, Fairfield to be affordable. Um, but the assessment it doesn't directly tie to the budget itself. Those are two independent processes. The way that I often describe it is, the budget is baking the pie, and the assessment is deciding how the pie gets sliced up. And so we haven't gone through our budget process this year. We haven't baked the pie. We don't know how big the pie is, but we do know how that will be sliced once the pie is baked. Um, so if we did some numbers, worked with the assessor to try and explain things to people, and the reality is, even if the town budget is held flat year over year, just with the shift in burden um, from commercial to residential, residential taxes on average will go up about 7.5 to 8%. Now that's a big increase year over year because last year taxes went up 1.76%. The year before that it was 1.42%, and the year before that it was just under 1%. So we've been trying to keep budget increases at or below the rate of inflation, but in the year of a revaluation, it's inevitable that there's this shift in category that will skew these numbers, and it's no one's fault. The town can't avoid a reassessment, and the numbers just kind of shook out. So it's unfortunate. What that does mean is that the Board of Finance is going to try really hard to work with the administration to make sure that we really sharpen our pencil and try and avoid any unnecessary increases to anyone's tax bill.
Yeah, and so I guess the part that stinks for you, perception wise, is that even if you guys lowered the tax, the budget by a little
Yeah,
bit, we're still having a tax increase for the average resident here in Fairfield because
yeah.
property values go up, which is both good and bad.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm very sensitive to the point that several people have made, and I'm certainly well aware of, is because property taxes are based on assessed value. That's current, and this year it's the current market value. For families that are new to Fairfield, who have young kids who plan to stay here for a while, raise their families through the school system, for seniors who are planning or hoping to retire here and stay here, for people who are not planning on moving anytime soon, the assessed value is somewhat irrelevant, right? Like it's great if you're planning on moving sometime soon that you can sell your home for 64% more than it was worth 5 years ago. But if you're not planning on moving, this property tax effectively, the way that the state statute is set up, is effectively a tax on unrealized gains. And that's something that doesn't resonate well with anybody.
Yeah, before I dug into this, I always thought that, I guess, you would think that your property value increasing is a good thing, but obviously it comes with the necessary tax increase. Does this though mean that people who are buying businesses in Fairfield, commercial properties, are going to have a lower tax rate?
It is, yeah. Now that's the flip side of the coin, right? So if the town budget was $100 million, for example, and now the residents are asked to pick up more, that means that the commercial properties are picking up less. Now that doesn't mean that the commercial properties have gone down in value. They haven't. They've actually gone up 17%, as you indicated earlier,
They've
Arab.
just gone up
Um,
less.
it's just gone up less, exactly. But if you do the math, that means that a business property tax, just like the residents are going up about 7.5 to 8% on average, because of the weighting there, commercial properties are going to come down about 20. Their tax bills are going to come down about 25%. So this is an opportunity for Fairfield to potentially attract commercial businesses to Fairfield and help grow the grand list on the commercial side, which will be a real good thing because anytime a town or city can increase its grand list on the commercial side, that doesn't put an additional burden on the school system, or some of the other demands on parks and rec and other things that commercial businesses don't take advantage of, right? So I think it's everybody's goal to try and use this as an opportunity to grow the commercial grand list, and attract more business to come to Fairfield.
Right, and of course, there's so many different ways that bringing more businesses to Fairfield helps the town, helps the community. This was such an amazing conversation, Craig. I learned so much
Good.
about your role, taxes, and I'm really glad you were able to join the show today. One question uh, to end off today's
Sure.
conversation. You moved to Fairfield 30 years ago. You were talking about that. I don't
Yep.
know how long you lived in Connecticut before that, if you did, but as a longtime resident of Fairfield, if you're going out to pizza for New Haven Pizza, this is the question I ask all of my guests. When I
Yeah.
asked Christine, First Select Woman Vitali, She said
Yeah.
Frank Pepe's Pizza, but where would you be going for New Haven Pizza here in Connecticut?
Yeah, a great question. I probably got three on my list that are absolute go-tos. The very first pizza we ever had, our first experience with pizza in Fairfield, I remember we loaded up our U-Haul and moved to our very first home when we bought our home in 1996. And it was Pizza Mediterranean, Black Rock and Kings Highway cut off there. And to this day, Pizza Med is one of the stalwarts in town. Now, having said that, there are two others that have become favorites over the years. No, I think everyone would agree Naughty Dolphin is phenomenal. Greg and his team do a phenomenal job at Naughty Dolphin, and I work in downtown Fairfield, and I often will walk over and grab a slice or two or pick up pizza at the end of the day for dinner. Naughty Dolphin's one of the favorites. And of course, on the other side of town, on the Stratfield side of town, Mione's is another great option. Those three, they're not the New Haven style like Sally's and Pepe's. Great pizza. Glad they came to Fairfield from New Haven and expanded down our way. It's a great option. We go there as well. But you can't take anything away from Pizza Med, Naughty Dolphin, and Mione's.
Great Fairfield Pizza. Thank you so much for joining the show today, Craig. That's the first time I think anybody's listed three spots in Fairfield uh, for my pizza question at the end of every episode. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, talking to us about your role as the new chairman of Fairfield, Connecticut's Board of Finance. Political peeps, this was Arav Kapoor and Craig Curley. You guys know the drill. Peace out and see you next time.